Hello everyone and welcome to the Edureka session of Angular. I welcome you all for this demo session in which we intend to cover most of the sections of Angular in quite some pace. And in case you are interested, you are welcome to join one of our course materials in Angular, and I hope to see you there. So let's get started for the day today. In this particular session, we will be concentrating on a few aspects. We'll actually look at some aspects of JavaScript. We'll understand what a single page application is, how Angular fits into a single page application, what is Angular, why we choose Angular, and then we'll look at a quick demonstration of how to get started with Angular and work across with the basic building blocks of Angular. So having said that, our focus, our agenda is going to be Webpage and DOM manipulation. We will talk a little about jQuery and JavaScript. We'll look at why Angular, what is a single page application in the first place, and then we'll look at an introduction of Angular with its features and installation. After that, we'll cover basic building blocks of Angular and then look at the Angular architecture. Great. So web page and a DOM is something we all are aware of. If you're not, it's a single, simple page where you can define data or some tags to display that in the UI. And the UI is going to be your browser. So hypertext is display a UI in the browser. It will actually create a DOM tree, if you notice, from the HTML tag to head and a body, and the body will go ahead traverse to an H1 and a paragraph tag or a span tag or a div tag, etc. This particular DOM tree is something that we might want to remember because this is exactly what we are going to take out, pull out, and understand the concept of Angular as well. DOM manipulation. There have been a lot of libraries across for DOM manipulation. You could actually do DOM manipulation from pure JavaScript. There was a library called as jQuery, and that still is. It does a fantastic job of manipulating the DOM. And then came Angular, which changed the scenario in which you do DOM manipulation, not just DOM manipulation. Actually, it changed the way in which you create applications of web. And taking that into consideration, what basically DOM manipulation is, you go ahead, take the DOM structure, the DOM tree that we created for an HTML page, make some changes to it, go ahead, put that back in the browser. This particular process of changing one particular section into a different section is basically called as DOM manipulation. There are a few DOM manipulation APIs available in JavaScript, which have been used and exploited by jQuery as well as Angular. At this particular point of time, we are going to focus on JavaScript and jQuery for DOM manipulation, and they do DOM manipulation pretty well. For very simple page applications, very simple applications or very simple pages, JavaScript is going to be the best that you can do, because in maybe one line or two line you can do the basic change that you need and you can get away with what is going to be your requirement. But in case you want some extended features like adding a class, removing a class, looking at the class list, etc., doing some scaled DOM manipulation, jQuery is a suggested library, and in that particular scenario, you would definitely want to have a look at jQuery as well if you have not used that before. But then UI is one of the most simplest form of view, or it can be one of the most complex form of view. The reason why I say that is because UI is never tested. UI is never created with maintainability in mind, and it's one of the most abused. But things changed when single page applications or single page application frameworks like Angular started coming in and making a change in which we actually do DOM manipulation. We actually show the view, or we actually change one particular view state to another. So a lot of changes started happening, and during that change actually became very simplistic. Change actually became more maintainable, and change became more testable because of the way change was being managed. But let's look at JavaScript and jQuery in a quick view. JavaScript is a scripting language for the browser. It is used to manipulate DOM. One of the best examples of DOM manipulation is document.body.style, where you change the style, with a background or background color, and then assign a particular red color to it. You could also do the same thing by capturing that particular DOM element using the body, $body dot CSS, and then provide that particular section to it. So these methods were available with Angular as well, but what is the basic difference between Angular and JavaScript? That's exactly what we are here for. So what does jQuery do? DOM manipulation? Yes. Animation support? Yes. Ajax and JSON to get data? Yes. But it does not work pretty much in a scaled manner with REST APIs, does not have routing, does not have a lot of form validation APIs, and it definitely does not provide you two-way binding or something that we call as property or value binding to HTML. So what is a single page application? What does Angular basically do? Well, if you have noticed Gmail, when you click on the mail, it actually opens the mail section and it does it quite fast without reloading the whole page. Without reloading the whole page was something really important, because without reloading the whole page basically avoided you loading the static CSS files, static JS files, etc., which can be actually reused once it is loaded. And now that we know that a single page application does not reload, single page application provides you a few benefits. One, it saves you network because your static files are not reloaded time and again. It saves you a lot of processing in the server that is needed for processing your HTML page and then serving the static pages as well as JavaScript to your browser. It saves a lot of server resources as well as internet bandwidth, which can actually be utilized a lot more for other purposes. And your client resources are used here to the maximum so that any kind of change of view or any kind of change of view sections are processed in your client browser, and the client resources are used for that. Any kind of interactions, you can actually use JavaScript, which changes the view, or you can use JavaScript to trigger off XHR request to update the data or get the new data. So that's exactly what is happening here. A single page application is a single HTML page that never reloads. It comes across with all the HTML files, all the JS files, and once it has loaded, it just makes specific changes to the places where a particular action has happened and a particular change has been requested for. So that's what Angular is all about. Angular is going to create a page for you which is not going to reload, which is going to save you a lot of network as well as server resources, which can be used for something else. And it is running in the client side after being served from the server. What was the traditional way of? The traditional way of getting a particular page was making a request, getting the whole page from the client, making a request again, and getting a whole page again from the client. The page would actually include your CSS, JS, and HTML files all together. It was most often than not never just REST API and REST API back. So that was the traditional way. But in this particular case where you are working with a single page application, you serve your HTML, JS, and CSS files once. Second, you actually make Ajax-like requests or XHR requests in the form of JSON to send data or to get data. And going forward, it will always do request only with JSON as well as XML type of request, but most often than not, JSON is preferred because of low footprint. Great, so let's look at Angular framework in a little more detail. Angular is basically an open source client-side JavaScript framework. It is created by Google, but Angular 1 did not start that way. Angular 1 started with 2 people starting the framework, and then Google took it over and started maintaining it. But Angular 2, Angular 4 has been rewritten by Google to make it compatible with future bleeding edge technologies of JavaScript, and was created with a lot of issues in mind that were prevalent with Angular 1.x applications, and something that was needed for the future were clubbed in to create a good design and an application framework that helped you create scalable applications or enterprise-like applications. So it accomplishes a lot by doing a very simple thing. It takes HTML, JavaScript, CSS, takes all the concepts of it, mixes them in such a way that your static HTML is convert it to a dynamic HTML, and that creates your application. But the application is created in such a way that it is more maintainable and it is also a lot more testable. Introduction of object-oriented web development using TypeScript was one of the best thing that happened. And TypeScript not only introduced a lot of modular design pattern for application development, but it also introduced a lot of typing across JavaScript applications that helped you detect errors, helped you manage your application much better. Static typing makes a lot of difference when you do application development, and we'll have a quick look at that as well. Angular is useful for building complex applications in the browser and beyond because it can be used for creating mobile applications as well. So that's Angular in a quick view. So let's look at Angular features. There are a lot of Angular advantages. There are a lot of Angular features that come with Angular 2, 4 and above. One thing that you might really want to understand is most of people say that Angular is actually now Angular 4. What is happening with Angular? Angular was Angular 2 6 months back, 1 year back, and suddenly it has become Angular 4. Well, let me tell you, Angular is going to release a new version every 6 months, and it is going to keep the entire framework updated with the newest concept. And it is going to maintain it in such a way that you are always working with bleeding edge technologies and you can create scalable application with Angular. You don't need to fret because even if there is an API that is going to be downgraded, it is going to be available for next 2 versions of Angular, and you should still be able to manage across with the same code or maybe change it over a period of time by the time it gets pulled out of that new version. But all said and done, you really don't have to worry about the versioning because versioning is just a method of providing you or letting you know that things are changing, APIs are changing. But if APIs do change, the older versions will still stay for next 2 versions. That is something that you really want to understand. Angular has been created with a lot of new JavaScript support in mind, and it actually supports ES6 and TypeScript. You can do development in simple plain ES6 or you can do development in TypeScript. It's a choice that you want to make. I would strongly recommend TypeScript, at least basic some amount of typing for your application. But if you don't want to do that, if you're averse for using types in JavaScript and you prefer pure JavaScript, you can also do that. It has been built with speed and performance in mind, and it manages memory quite well. Once loaded, it actually is very performant and very fast. Let's understand that speed is not equivalent to your load time. Load time will be a little different because a basic application of Angular going forward might be somewhere 250 KB and above, which is quite fair in today's network scenario. And speed is something that I wanted to refer when working with any kind of changes or any kind of actions in the web page. So that being said, Angular is also very modular. It is so modular that each of the files adhere to system.js modularity pattern or common.js modularity pattern. Each of the files will be modular. On top of it, all these files can be clubbed into one particular Angular module, which is provided as a modular functionality by Angular. So you have 2 types of modularity out here. One is file-based modularity that is provided by file-based modularity libraries like system.js or common.js, and one modularity which is provided by your Angular framework. We will look at that in quite some detail with some demonstrations. You will also have support for mobile tablets, etc. All right, great. So let's quickly look at a very basic demonstration of Angular, where we will be able to install Angular in our system and get started. There are a few ways to go ahead, get your Angular setup ready. Remember, Angular development for 2, 4 and above will require Node.js. Why Node.js? Well, you can do development without Node.js as well, but I prefer you have Node.js installed because it provides tremendous amount of tooling around Angular development. The tooling may include, providing your development server. Tooling may include providing your testing environment. Tooling may include any kind of build process or any kind of tasks, etc. And when we talk about tooling, I'm going to introduce you to one tool called as Angular CLI, on which we are going to base our demonstrations here. So let's quickly go ahead and look at Angular website and understand how your Angular is provided for installation. And there are two ways. One way is to go to Quick Start. You can go to Quick Start, go to Quick Start seed, either clone that particular repository or download that particular repository as a zip file. This is one option, but I definitely myself prefer something called as Angular CLI. Angular CLI is a command line tool that will help you set up a particular project, work with a particular project, make changes to a project, generate new sections in a project, build the project for production, and create a distribution for it as well as test the project that you're doing. So it is a comprehensive command line tool that will help you work with Angular. But for installing Angular CLI, you need something called as Node.js. If you don't have Node.js installed, or if you're not aware of Node.js, Node.js is a V8 JavaScript engine that is going to understand JavaScript, and you can run JavaScript in the server. We need Node.js because the CLI runs in the JavaScript environment, and that is the one which provides you tooling around Angular development. So having said that, you can actually go and download and install your binary for your operating system. The installation is pretty clean, and once you have installed that, when you go to a particular folder or a particular path, you should have two commands available to you. Node-v, which should provide you with the version of the node, and there should be another one that is called as npm-v. npm helps you manage your packages for Node.js, and Node is the one that runs your JavaScript environment. So these two commands are something that needs to be there, and once you go ahead have Node set up, you will be able to install two things. The first is Angular CLI and the second is TypeScript. To install Angular CLI, please go ahead and do npm install. I'm going to go ahead and get Angular CLI, and I'm going to install it in the global environment. That's exactly the command that Angular CLI says needs to be there. If you want the latest version, you can actually go ahead and mention @latest, and it should install the latest one. If you're installing it for the first time, it really does not matter. If I hit enter, CLI would be available in the global environment, and there are a few commands that are going to be available. I'm not going to hit enter. I just demonstrated that particular command for you, but you can go ahead and install it. I already have it installed, and it will introduce you with a new command in your system, and the command is ng. If you type ng version and it provides you a version, then you are actually ready to run your CLI. The CLI that I have right now is the latest. It is 1.0 version, which has just been released some time back, and I'm going to use ng CLI for any kind of installation, any kind of project setup, etc. So I'm going to do the demonstration with this. Apart from that, I also have a command called as tsc. To get this particular command, you would need to install TypeScript, and the way you install TypeScript is npm install TypeScript-g. So you would basically type npm install TypeScript-g. It should install TypeScript and make the command tsc available to you. I'm not going to hit enter. The command is going to be the same for Linux, Mac, as well as Windows. So this particular command is going to be common across the node environment, whether it's operating system Windows, OS, or Linux operating systems, Unix or Linux. So tsc is the command that is going to be available to you. If you have this particular version coming out, then you do have tsc installed. So once your environment has been set up, you should now be ready to go ahead and run your application setup for Angular. So let's quickly go ahead and set up our Angular application. I'm not going to go into quick start method of installation. I'm actually going to use ng CLI setup method. So I'm going to go into demo folder, demo ng folder, which is the one where I'm going to install my project. And I'm going to create a folder called as maybe test or demo, and within that particular folder I'm going to create my new app. The command to create a new project is ng new demo. It'll create a folder named demo, then it'll create a project within that particular demo folder. So let me just hit enter and get the setup started. Once the setup starts, we will go ahead and start understanding what are the other requirements and needs for Angular development, and we'll go step by step understanding each of them. So the setup has started. Let it set up that particular project. We'll understand some more things. So what is TypeScript? TypeScript is the language that we are going to work with, and TypeScript is the one that ng-CLI provides you by default. Most often than not, a lot of people actually fret the change in the environment that has happened in JavaScript, and they don't pick up the new sections just because syntaxes are different, some particular naming is different. Don't really worry about that, because the moment you understand what that particular section does, it's actually easier to use than pure JavaScript. So let's quickly go ahead and do some very quick demos here. I am going to demonstrate TypeScript to you, and I'm also going to let you know what sections you might need to know well if you want to get adjusted with Angular development quite fast. So I'm going to go ahead, create a file called as requirement.js. The first that you might need to know well is basic data types of JavaScript, and a good idea of basic data types with null and undefined is definitely an advantage. The second thing that you might really want to know is array and array manipulation. This is something that you really want to understand. And the third is object and object manipulation. If you are okay with this, you should technically be able to get across with Angular development quite well without any kind of hiccups. And if you want to learn a little bit more about modular structures, design patterns, etc., I definitely recommend some design patterns that you might want to learn, and one is singleton, the second is factory, and maybe you might also want to look at constructor patterns. This is definitely not a requirement, but it's actually good to know. Great. So if you know this, you should be able to get started with Angular pretty much well. And you should actually be able to get started with TS also pretty much well. What is TS? TS is nothing but TypeScript. I'm going to do one simple thing. I'm going to help you understand TS a little bit more, and I'm going to change this particular file name to requirement req.ts. The first thing that you might want to understand about TypeScript is that TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, which means that whatever you write, okay, valid JS is valid JavaScript. So whatever you write, if it is pure JavaScript, it is valid. TypeScript as well. One. Second is, since it is a superset of JavaScript and you use some features of TypeScript, you will be able to do something called as transpile TypeScript into JavaScript. That is something that is provided as an first thing, that you would be able to transpile TypeScript files into pure JavaScript, and you should be able to run JavaScript from the browser. One of the biggest differences between TypeScript and JavaScript is that TypeScript provides types. It provides options for creating interfaces, It helps you work with classes pretty much well. You can work with decorators in TypeScript, or you can work with modularity pretty much easily. If you want to work with TypeScript and understand TypeScript, I definitely recommend the handbook. All right, it talks about types, it talks about classes, functions, generic, enums, etc., everything that is possible within TypeScript. What I'm going to do is quickly, in a minute or two, I'm going to introduce you to different features of TypeScript, very basic features of TypeScript, so that you understand what code we are writing here. TypeScript is modular, which means that every file is going to be a module. So to work with objects in TypeScript, if you want to use a particular object from outside, you have to import that particular object from that particular file. So anything that you want access within this particular module has to be imported. It can be either an simple object or it can be complete set of objects. One. The second thing is, if you have created a variable called as x and you want to use it outside this particular TypeScript file, you have to export it. If you don't export it, no other file can use this particular x. That's one of the biggest advantages of having file modularity, and your files are now independent, and since they are independent, they are more maintainable, and since they are more maintainable, they are actually testable as well. The second thing that you might want to understand is you can create a class. All right, a class can be created with class name of the class. Since it's a class, like in all other languages, it also has a constructor which will instantiate anything that you want here. Apart from that, you can actually go ahead and define functions here, and it should not proceed with the name function that we generally use in JavaScript. You can go ahead, define as many functions as you want. You could also define variables that needs to be before the constructor, and variables are defined also without a where or a let here. You can directly go ahead and define an x and say x is equal to test variable, and it would be converted to valid JavaScript with a this.x. Once you have done that, I told you TypeScript is all about types. You can actually now go ahead and say x is of the type string. If you want, you can say x is of the type number to ensure that only numbers are assigned to x. If you notice, the moment I changed it to number, it started giving me errors saying that it's not assignable to type number. I will have to forcefully keep it assigned with a number only. The different types that are assignable to a particular variable is string, second is number, the third is boolean, and the fourth is any. Any refers to any function, any object, any array, etc. But if you want to define an array of strings, you can define an array of strings something like this, which should have a set of strings. If you want to define an array of numbers, you can define an array of numbers which is an array of numbers. The moment you go ahead and make it string, it'll throw up errors on you. The third is you can actually do boolean arrays also, or you can actually do any object arrays also. Any array is going to allow you string arrays, number arrays, object arrays, or even mixed arrays for that matter. So work across with what you need for types. Since it's a class, like other languages, you will also have access to public, private, and protected. This access modifier is available to you, and you will also have interfaces in TypeScript. you can create an interface called as point, where you can specify that point has X variable, which is of the type string, and point has Y, which is of the type number. And I can go ahead, implement point on a particular class, and if you notice, it's giving me an error saying that it does not implement it right because my X is private. The moment I make it public, it will remove that particular error, and that's because of the array. Now it should remove that particular error. You will also be able to use point directly as a type, which is absolutely legal, and you would be able to work across with it. Apart from that, you also have an opportunity to create a different class which extends a previous class, and if you want to instantiate the parent class, you can actually go ahead and do a super. It should implement the parent class, and you should be able to use the parent class also, and you can access the parent class variables if they are public. So this was TypeScript basics in a jiffy. If you want to have a look at advanced types, if you want to have a look at enums, definitely have a look at it. If you want to have a look at namespaces, which we did not cover right now, have a look at it. Decorators and mixins is something that we did not cover. So this is something that you really want to work with. Great. So that was basics about TypeScript. We really don't need TypeScript right now. Now we are done with TypeScript, so I'm going to close it. And I'm going to come back to my demo section. Seems like everything has been installed. Let's look at it. Yes, everything has been installed, so our project has been created. Our project has been created with a few files already. So what is this? This is actually your Angular CLI startup project, where CLI.json has the set of all commands and metadata that is required for Angular CLI to manage this particular project, run this particular project, test this particular project, as well as build this particular project or lint this particular project. You have karma.conf.js, which will help you with unit testing, protractor.conf.js, which will help you with end-to-end testing, and tsconfig is the one that tells Angular CLI which version of JavaScript it should compile to, what is the modularity that you want to use, and if you notice, target is ES5. So it is going to convert your TypeScript code into ES5 code, which can run on browsers. And if you want, you can actually specify 2 more pointers out here. The pointers that normally are provided are no implicit any and supplicit implicit any index errors. Now remember these two if put. If you put no implicit any as true and suppress implicit index errors as true, you will be forced to use types. But if you don't put that, you can actually do ES6 kind of coding with TypeScript. So that being said, it's a choice whether you want to work with ES6 or TypeScript. That's entirely up to you. Now that we know what is TypeScript, now that we know what is Angular CLI, what it is going to do, let's actually look at some commands and understand what command is going to run when you create a particular project. So we have created a particular project. The name of the project that has been created for us is demo. So it has all the dependencies and it has all the development dependencies. Dependencies and development dependencies are different. Dependencies are needed for production. Development dependencies are not needed for production, and they are needed only for development environment or for development. So that is the one that keeps track of your project dependencies and development dependencies, and this is exactly what NPM manages. To have a look at NPM commands, go to Node.js documentation. It provides you an entire set of NPM installation and installation process, which should be pretty much easy to work with. If you notice, there is a set of files which have already been put by ngCLI. The first is index.html, and there is absolutely nothing in it other than something called as app root. Now this particular app root is a component that we have created, and this is the core of Angular. The point I'm trying to make is Angular is revolving around the concept of web components, which means that Angular revolves around the concept of creating your own custom components and creating an application that uses these components. The whole idea is when you create reusable components which are independent and isolated, you will be able to create scalable applications, maintainable applications, and testable applications. So your whole application resides within your app root. Your second file is main.ts file, which is kind of a little important because this file is going to go ahead and get this application bootstrapped. We are going to create our application as modules like we discussed before, and your module is kept in app.module.ts. If you notice this particular file, we have actually imported app module and we are importing that to bootstrap this particular app module. Once we have imported and bootstrap, you should be able to run this particular application. But let's quickly look at what is there in app module. App module is something that declares all your environments for your application. The environment may be declaration of components that you have created, declarations of modules that you have to use within this particular application, declarations of any kind of services that you need, and which is the component that you want to bootstrap as a root component that will indirectly bootstrap other sections as well. So I'm going to stop here without explaining anything else, and I'm going to run this particular project so that you are sure we have set up this particular project right. So I'm going to type ng-serve, and this should start a very simple development server. All right, I'm just going to go do a cd into demo because that's our root folder, and then type ng-serve. This should basically start. Let's give it some time. This should basically start your development environment for Angular. It should open up your browser, and in case you make a change in your application, it will also go ahead and refresh your browser, recompile your TypeScript files to JavaScript, build it again, and put it into the browser. That's what it basically does. So it's in the process of building optimization, and now we should have our application running in localhost. So when I run this particular project, it says app works, and that's all that it basically does. So let's quickly go ahead and get this particular application into a very simple application that we can run and work with. Let's come back and look at some particular conceptual sections of Angular and then go ahead continue with this particular demonstration. I'm going to keep the server open so that we can work with the demonstrations further as well. So one hard dependency, Node.js needs to be installed. Second hard dependency, TS needs to be installed. Once you have these two installed, you will be able to install Angular CLI. Once you do set up Angular CLI, you will be able to create a new project with ng new project name. There are a few building blocks of Angular. Modular, so modules are going to be there based on components. So component is one building block. Component will have the functionality. The functionality needs to be associated to DOM, right? So that's the reason template is there. And the template and the functionality of component is going to be joined with something called as metadata. So you will have a component annotation that will take a metadata and it will join your component class as well as your template, which may be DOM or which may be your custom elements as well. So it's completely on you what kind of template you're building. It provides you with something called as data binding, which will bind JavaScript variables to template. We'll have a look at that so that we understand binding in a much better fashion. Basically, data binding will provide you association of component functions as well as component models to the template and other way around as well. It also takes care of change detection. It takes care of updating the views, etc. Services, because you have a modular structure, it makes sense to go ahead, keep dependencies and manage dependencies from one place and inject them only when it is needed. Services are dependencies which can be injected when needed, and they are mostly kept as singletons. There are something called as directives and pipes which help you manage DOM manipulation. Great. So what is ng module and what is an Angular module in the first place? Angular module is not the file-based modularity. .ts is one single module, but that's one single file. So it is not file-based modularity. Angular module is something that encompasses all these file modules, combines all of the functionalities provided by components, directives, pipes, services, etc. to create one single functionality chunk that works cohesively and will have a cohesive block of functionality. That is the one that will have your application portlet or your application entirely. Each Angular app has at least one root module, and encapsulation of different similar functionality is going to be there, as well as you also will need to understand that each module will be encapsulated by itself. So within a particular single module, the module will be isolated. Nothing will be shared outside that particular module until you specify so, and everything will remain scoped within that particular module. Each of the modules section will have its own encapsulation because of file modularity, but remember, it will be combined together by Angular modularity to create an environment for Angular modules to create a complete cohesive block of functionality. We will be using ng module with metadata to create an Angular module. Great. So let's quickly look at what ng module basically declares. Ng module is a very simple declaration file basically. So it takes all the objects, whatever is required for the application, and is going to declare it within the metadata. The metadata is going to tell Angular that, okay, this is the root module, this is what the dependencies are, this is what the components are, this is what the pipes and services are, and you need to bootstrap X component as a root component. That's exactly what it does. The reason why I said it needs to bootstrap one root component, that is because in our index.html you have one root component that needs to be bootstrapped. It is going to start a sequential bootstrap where app root is going to bootstrap other templates, or it is going to bootstrap other components that you have created. So it is going to be a sequential chain of bootstrapping. So you will be bootstrapping only one single root component. In the declarations, you will declare components, directives, and pipes. In the import section, you will declare all the modules that you need as dependencies. Some modules are browser module, common module, forms module, HTTP module, etc. There is also one more thing called as providers, where you will be providing any kind of service that is required as a dependency that needs to be injected into your classes. So these are common places where you will keep common data, common functionality, and then inject it according to your application's need. Bootstrap, like I said, is going to be one single component that you will be bootstrapping as a root component. So that is your module. Let's look at our app module. It is going to be approximately similar, and it is not going to have any other things out here. This particular section is going to get filled as soon as we start putting functionality in our application. At this particular point of time, it really does not have anything. It just declares app component and bootstraps app component. That's about it. Your entire application of app works is actually residing in your app component. Great. So what is a component? So whenever we look at a particular component, it's nothing but single cohesive block of some particular functionality. Maybe it's a navbar. Maybe it's a news feed which will show you a list of news items. Maybe it's a slide bar. Maybe it's just a text that changes after a few seconds. Maybe it's a footer. These are all different sections, and you can actually separate them and separate these concerns, separate this particular section which you know is going to be one single block of functionality. So you can take out navbar and create a navbar component. You can take out newsfeed and create a newsfeed component. You can take a sliding bar and put a component out there. and this can be reused again and again at a lot of places. So that's the whole concept of Angular. Angular says don't work with something where you will have to create a structure again and again or repeat a particular structure again and again. Use reusable components where once you create that, you can just push that in and that particular functionality will come in. Just change the data and the structure that will be shown will be based on the data. That's what components are basically for. Great. So now we have a sports component. When we click on sports component, it will actually show the sports section. Like ng component, a component is created as a class and a template. The one which joins the template and the class basically is the annotator. Annotation is also referred to as a decorator, and this particular annotation is the one that takes the metadata, which has details of name of the tag, which has details of styles that your component will need, which has details of template that you will be using, etc. The template will be the DOM that you are going to create. The DOM can have plain pure HTML tags or can have your own custom created tags, whatever you need in terms of creating a particular DOM template. It's completely on you. If you notice the app-example, that is the selector, that is actually your tag name that you're creating. So in our case, the app component will be created as app-root. If I go to app component, if you notice my selector is app-root, which means that I'm creating a tag called as app-root, which is going to have a functionality associated with the class this, and which is going to have a template, this one, and the styles which are associated only for that particular functionality is going to be app.component.css. That's your basic annotation. Your metadata is not very complicated. There is nothing complicated about metadata. If you notice, it's actually a simple object. It's a pure JavaScript object that has a key value pair. The key value pair will be selector, template URL, style URL, etc. Your metadata is the one that tells how the component should behave. Your metadata is the one that tells how the component should be created. And your metadata is the one that tells your component how to make change or how to detect changes, whether it's completely isolated, whether it's not completely isolated, etc. Anything that's revolving around creation of a particular component, properties of a particular component, or functionality of a particular component will be there in metadata. That's exactly what metadata holds. There are a few metadatas available, but one of the most simplest metadata and the bare minimum metadata that you need to get started is selector, template, and style URLs. If you want, you can avoid style URLs also if you really don't want any CSS, but just go ahead with the DOM template. That's about it. And a component class. Remember, we are always going to export a component class, and there is never going to be a semicolon after the annotation. Remember, if you put a semicolon after annotation component, your code will break. Don't use a semicolon. Export that particular class because you will be declaring this particular class in app.module, right? So let's quickly look at our class. Our class is a very simple class which has app.component.html and app.component.css in it. And I will have just titled that. And this is the one that says app works. Let's change this and say Angular works. If you notice, it's actually recompiling. It automatically recompiled and automatically restarted this. So your mundane task, which gives you pain to your fingers or wastes at least 20% of your time refreshing the browser and making changes or recompiling, is taken off. So that's one of the reasons why I recommended Node.js, where tooling will be available for you when working with your application. So that was about components. Let's quickly go ahead and work with some more components. I'm going to do a very simple demonstration of how to create a component with the CLI. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the command ng, and I'm going to say generate. I'm going to say component, and then I'm going to give the path, and the path is going to be from the app folder. All right, so I'm going to say create a component called as list, and I'll show you where it is going to create it. So if you notice, it created a component in source/app/list folder, and it also updated app.module. Oh, is it? So what happened here? It created a list component, it imported the list component, and it actually put it into declarations in the list component. So components are going to be created and it's going to be declared also. In normal scenarios, you will actually have to import it and declare it, but ngCli takes care of it. Let's see what is there. If you notice, ngCli actually gives you the basic test bed that is required to start off with testing. The only thing further you have to do is go ahead to a unit testing. So your component has a selector, your component has an app list, template URL, style URL, etc. You could actually go ahead and start putting in functionality here. So let's work with some particular functionality. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an set of list items, and I'm going to say it's of the type any, and I'm going to create very simple set of movies. It's a simple array that I'm going to create. And let's look at some good features of Angular during the process. So I have an array that has 4 movies, movie 1, 2, 3, and 4. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go to HTML, and within this I'm going to put UL, and I'm going to create a list. What do I have to do? I will have to repeat that and do a document.get and then print it here, right? That is exactly what you do in JavaScript. Let's quickly look at the JavaScript code that we might really understand what JavaScript does. In case you want to do any kind of change, you will actually have to do document.getElementById.innerHTML make us double, which will, right? So this is what you would do to make a change. And similarly, in case of jQuery, this is what you would be doing. And let's look at the jQuery example. It will basically capture your ID and it is going to make a change there. This is what you would be technically doing in jQuery as well as JavaScript. But let's look at how different it is in case of Angular. I'm going to use a directive called as ng_for, which is nothing but a simple DOM manipulator function. All right, it is written as *ng_for. This is a functionality which is a DOM manipulator, and it is going to give you a very strong function called as for loop. It is going to loop the items, and I'm going to say items of list items. So it is going to automatically pick up list items from your component and is going to print up that. I'm going to leave it as it is. Before going forward, I am going to create another variable called as title, and I'm going to say it is a type string, and I'm going to say testing directives and binding. I'm going to copy this title and I'm going to print this particular title in an h1 tag. The way I print directly is putting 2 flower brackets and putting up this particular variable name, the same variable name that is provided in JavaScript directly. So this is going to actually take the JavaScript variable and is going to go ahead put it into title in the HTML. Let's look at what is the result of this, but before doing that, I'm just going to do one more small binding. I'm going to do a binding of item. So what is happening here? It is actually taking this particular list items. It is going to go ahead to a for loop. It is going to take each of this. It is going to assign it to item, and then it is going to print this particular item. Let's restart and see what is the result of this. Great. So let me refresh. And if you now notice, nothing happens. It did not get affected here. Why did it not get affected here? Because we are just bootstrapping one component called as AppRoot. And AppRoot needs to bootstrap list component, or it needs to bootstrap list component somewhere, wherever it is in the path of app root instantiation. The only way I can think of right now, because we only have one particular component, which is a root component, and there are no other components associated, I might as well go to app component and say HR, and I will go ahead and declare my component here. Now, if I look, it will actually repeat the sections of the for loop and it will actually put the title as well there. So Angular is very powerful, and you did not need a lot of code to do any of these things. This is a very simple application. Maybe it might be overdue if you use Angular for just this particular page. But what about applications where you really need to work across with huge amounts of code for the client application? That's exactly where Angular is going to come handy, because Angular is going to help you create codes that are going to be scalable. Let's come back and understand what all we did right now. So we now know that there is binding possible. Binding is a way where you can take a JavaScript variable and put it into the HTML. That is exactly what data binding is all about. And there are a few types of metadata available: from selector, from templates, from styles, etc. What does the metadata do? Metadata is nothing but something that provides you with the opportunity to combine the functionality of component class with the template and tell the component how it needs to be instantiated, how it needs to behave, what is the functionality associated, and how change detection should work on that particular application, etc. That is exactly what component does. Component annotation is the one that takes the metadata and creates that binding. So an annotation combines your class and your template. Annotation module, ng module, is going to combine your application module class as well as your actual module metadata and create an application. So we saw selector, template URLs, style URLs, providers. Let's quickly understand this particular section. If you notice, we had a root component and we had a root template. And what we basically did was, in the root template, we used a set of templates that were pure HTML tags, but we also did go ahead use something called as a custom component that we created, which we created in list.component.ts, and then went ahead and associated that with the declarations in the module, and then went ahead and declared it within your component. So if you notice, what is technically happening is your root component is the one that is going to be instantiated. It is the one that takes the child templates, whether the child template, it may be a custom component or it may be a simple DOM component. It really does not matter. But what it basically does, it instantiates your application as a component tree. And that's exactly what your application is going to look like. Your application is going to be completely based on components, and it is going to be a component tree, and it will be based on the interaction between the parent and child components and between the component tree branches. But remember, components are going to be isolated. That's one of the biggest points of Angular, and that is exactly what is going to restrict us at a lot of places. And there are a few methods called as inputs and outputs to work across with parent-child communication, and services to work with two different branches. So interpolation or expression binding is how you can take JavaScript objects and put it into DOM. Property binding is a method where you can take a particular property and associate with the DOM. One method of property binding could also be this. This is also a method of binding. But a different way of binding, I might want to say, maybe src, where I bind it to a particular variable, maybe src path, and I'll copy this. I'll go to my list component and I'm going to declare it here. I'm going to declare it as a string and I'm going to make it as a path from app/, or I'll actually need to go ahead, put it into assets/logo.png. Let me quickly get logo here. So I'm going to go ahead and put that logo within my assets. Great. So is this in the path of HTML? Yes, it's in the path of HTML. Let's quickly look at what is happening? If you notice, now the logo actually has come in. I could actually have put that at a different place completely, and we could have, okay, great. So there you go. That is also binding. That very specifically is called as attribute binding. Remember, interpolations and attribute binding are a way to bind component class to a template. But you can also go other way around, which means that you can work with click events, you can work with triggering of a particular function after an event has happened. Mouse over, mouse leave, click, focus. These are all events that are there in the DOM. Angular says, apart from these events that are user events which are related to the DOM, why not go ahead, create custom events and work across with that. So you now have the opportunity to create your own custom events and work across with them when they are triggered. So as soon as a particular event is triggered, you can trigger a particular function and do some particular action or any kind of data change, or maybe make an XHR request on click of a button. That exactly is what we will quickly look at right now. So we looked at property binding. Let's also quickly look at an event binding out here. So I'm going to close this particular section. I'm going to go here and I'm going to say, let's create a button, and I'm going to capture click. The difference between property binding and an event binding is, in property binding you would use a square bracket, which is a sugar that is needed for Angular. It's a syntactical requirement, and an event capture will be denoted by round bracket. Event is going to go ahead, get your event, send any kind of data captures from your DOM to the class, and the class is going to attach to the DOM using your attribute binding. So now that your events are ready, I can actually go ahead and trigger a particular function here. I'm going to trigger an onSelect function on click of a button which says submit. And let me quickly just go ahead, create a particular function called as onSelect. And I'm just going to do a console log to demonstrate that. Great. This is event binding. Remember, in Angular, event binding is always from component to the template and from the template to the component. It is one-way binding. Component to the template is through attribute as well as expression binding or interpolation. In case of event binding, it is going to be from template to the JavaScript. Let's quickly look at what has happened. Let's open up the dev console. Let's look at an error that has happened which is not related to ours here. It's an XHR request that has come, and let me click. If you notice, the button was clicked. So this is exactly how you would capture an event. In case there is a particular change, you can capture that particular change from a form element and then send it to JavaScript. Maybe from the JavaScript, you might want to do some change in the application directly, or you might want to contact the server, get some data, and then put it back into your application. That might be a process that you might want to follow, any kind of process, but definitely you have three kinds of binding here. The first is called as interpolation. The second is called as property binding. Property binding is denoted by square brackets. Third is called as event binding, which is denoted by round brackets. The only difference is interpolation and property is from component class to the DOM, and event binding is from the template to the component, or from the DOM to the component. It is always one-way binding. You can mimic two-way binding using something called as mimicking of two-way binding, and that will be denoted by a square and a round bracket. ng model is an example where you can associate a particular property of JavaScript to a particular input tag or a select form tag, work across with that. If there are changes, capture the changes also in the JavaScript with two-way binding. Great. So property binding is from component class to the template. Event binding is from template to the component for capturing any kind of changes. Maybe it might be data or any kind of user events, etc. Great. So data binding is also important for communication between parents and children. There is a metadata called as input, which will pass data into the child, and that is done with something called as property binding. All right. In this particular section, we will be looking at services very specifically. Services are nothing but a very simple dependency object that Angular helps you create, where you can use that to either do some kind of activity by putting business logic or presentation logic or putting common functionalities or any kind of functionality like maybe authentication or logging. You can put everything out there. Apart from that, you can also use these services as a configuration store or any kind of data store where you can access data time and again from that particular section. So that being said about services, services are created generally as singletons in Angular. The section or the class that you're creating for service can move away from singleton pattern. You don't necessarily have to maintain one single object, which is basically what refers to a singleton pattern, to work across with services. But the point is, if you go ahead and need some kind of default configuration at the start, that's when you might want to move away from singleton. But in case you are looking at data sharing or you are looking at business logic sharing, you really don't need to have multiple copies of the same thing. In fact, for data sharing, it will be detrimental if you actually go ahead and use different objects for storing data, because in one component, you will be having one data shown, and in another component, another set of data will be shown. So preferably in case of such scenarios where you're sharing data, you would definitely need a singleton. And that exactly is what services do. Services is a broad category encompassing any value, any data, any object, function, or feature that your application needs, and they are injected into your components, services, directives as a dependency. This particular process is generally termed as dependency injection. And the purpose of dependency injection is nothing but to resolve a particular dependency or create and then resolve a particular dependency depending on whether the object is there or not into your dependent objects. The dependent objects might be, like I said, directives, components, or services themselves. So you can inject a service into a service as well. So that option is also available. So having said that, let's quickly go ahead and look at how we can create a particular service. Remember, service is created as a singleton, and singleton needs a particular process of setup. Angular makes it insanely easy for you by just using @injectable annotation, and it will be created as a singleton. So that is going to be what a service is. Like I said, injectable is the annotation that helps you with creating a singleton service. So let's quickly go ahead and create a singleton service. I'm going to stop the server and I'm going to say ng generate service, and I'm going to give the path from the app folder. All right. So from the app folder, I am going to have maybe let's have a service folder. So services slash movies list slash movies list. Remember, if I don't provide the second path, it is not going to create a folder and it's not going to put the injectable into that particular folder. It will put it directly within services. So first I have to create a folder, and the movies list in the final section actually refers to your service name. So let's go ahead and hit enter. It should actually be able to create. Great. So this created your service. If you notice, it actually created your spec files also. And the only thing it did not do is it did not actually add this particular service, or it did not provide this particular service. Remember, component can also provide a particular service, or the module can also provide the service. The reason why it is done so is because if you provide the service in the component level, it'll be available for the component and the component tree below. And if you provide it at the module level, it'll be available for the whole application. Irrespective of whether you are providing it at a component level or at the module level, you still have to import that particular object and do a dependency injection. So let's quickly look at how to go ahead and work across with services so that it can be declared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now go ahead and get this particular service from path services movies list and movies list service, and I am going to get, right, it definitely says it is not a module. All right, let me just check. Okay, it should have movies list available. Okay, there you go, movies list. And I'm going to provide it for, declare it in the providers section for the whole application. So which means movies list service is now going to be available here for the whole application. What I'm going to do is I'm going to now do some small refactoring. I'm going to chip this particular section out, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to declare it within my movies service. I'm going to quickly create function call as get movies, and I am going to return this particular list items. There you go. So we have our function as well ready. I have already declared it here. Now I really don't need to declare it here. I will go ahead do a dependency injection of this particular list, and I am going to get it from movies list. Now that movies list is available within this particular module, I just have to go ahead do a dependency injection of movies list, and it should be available within this particular component. If you create another component called as maybe x.component.ts and you want that particular movies list in that particular component, you will also have to import it from there and use it. So at this particular point of time, even if I have declared, that's the only thing that I will have to remember to get it explicitly. This applies only for a particular service. It does not apply for a component, directive, or a pipe. And I can go ahead to a dependency injection. Dependency injection is nothing but passing of a particular object into the dependent object as a dependency, and that would be an argument. I just apply the movies list service to movies list, and I'm declaring it as private, so which means it is going to be available only in this particular class. I'm going to use the denotation underscore, which is the normal JavaScript syntax for providing private names, and this time I'm going to say list items is equal to this dot movies list, and it should get applied to that particular section. It is saying that it's not assignable to the type any. Is that because we do not have? All right, I have done a mistake. I'm sorry about that. It's actually a dependency. I completely ignored and forgot that particular part. And if you do get movies, it will be assignable because get movies is going to return you the list. The mistake I did was I assigned movies list to that particular list items, which was actually an array, and I tried to assign a class, which was wrong. I should have basically done get movies, and then get movies should have returned that particular list. So now we have a very simple application ready. Let me actually go ahead and do an ng serve, and let us check if that gets reflected here. So at this particular point of time, it is going to build. Right, so we should be able to get that in, and at this particular point of time, if you notice that same thing works even after refactoring that into a different service. So your service, now you can actually work with that particular service in such a way that you can add items to that particular list item, remove list items, etc., whatever you want to do. And even if you inject it in another component, the same list is going to be available to you in that particular scenario. If you make a change, the change will also be reflected in that particular component. So that is something that is going to be there, and that is something very nice about services. Great, so we quickly saw that you can actually work across with services, and service, it basically creates an instance of a class and then injects it as a dependency. If it is already available, it is going to resolve that already created object, and then it is going to do a dependency injection. It is used to provide services to a component and uses dependency injection process. Dependency injection process is taken care of by a library which is there within Angular, dependency injection library, which takes care of this particular purpose. Great. So we looked at how to do an injection, and we also looked at how to retrieve data from our section. The next section I'm going to talk about is called as directives. We have knowingly, unknowingly used directives in our application already, and these directives do one small thing. They help you manipulate the DOM. They help you manage any kind of behavior or appearances, and they manage changes for that. Components are also a kind of directives, but they are directives with template. Structural directives is a set of directives which adds and removes DOM elements, or they change DOM layout or DOM structure. That's the reason structural directives. Attribute directives are very simple behavior that you provide to a particular tag or an element when you apply it there. It is generally applied as an attribute and it changes the behavior, but it does not change the layout. So it does not make any changes to the structure of the DOM. It just provides you with some particular functionality. One of the best examples of attribute directive is the image that we discussed in some time back. This is an attribute directive. So an attribute directive is definitely going to get associated, and it is going to fetch that particular variable from your component class, and it is going to associate it to your section. Remember, attribute directives, these are attributes, normal attributes which provide two-way binding, but there are attribute directives already there, and one of the best examples that I can think of in case of attribute directive is called as ng model. Let me quickly demonstrate to you ng model, which might be kind of very nice for you to understand and learn. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, use something called as input, which is a tag, and I'm going to use ng model, which is a directive that just provides with two-way binding to the input tag with the component class. So I'm going to say ng model is of the type user, and I'm going to go ahead say ng model options is a standalone form item, and I'm going to get user defined within my list. So this time I'm going to say user is a string, and I'm going to assign testing attribute directives. It does not change the structure, it just goes ahead and makes a change or gives some particular feature. In case of ng model, the feature is it provides you with binding of data to your section. Let me quickly go to app module. There is one thing that I will want to go ahead add to this particular list of modules, and I'm going to get something from common, and I am going to get my common module, and I'm going to inject it in my list of modules that are going to be there. Now that I have it ready, let me go ahead and check it is actually recompiling it right now. Great. So if you notice, this particular value was assigned here. So that is the purpose of ng model. It's one example of a directive. If you want to see how powerful it is, you can actually do that. You will be able to bind it using an expression like we did for the title tag. And if you notice, that particular section will now be available in your DOM as well. So whatever change, this is two-way binding. And remember, you are not doing a two-way binding, you are actually mimicking two-way binding. The reason why I say that is it's attribute binding as well as event binding together in action. It is always going to be one-way binding in Angular 2, Angular 4 and above, and that's how it works. So it's basically a mimic of two-way binding. So what is a structural directive? Well, we have already seen that. If you notice this particular code, we have already seen a structural directive ngIf, ngFor, which basically change the structure of the DOM, whether taking it out from the DOM, putting it into the DOM, or repeating sections. So that exactly is structural directives. And let us also quickly look at a very simple attribute directive that we can create on our own. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a directive that is going to change each of the text to bold as soon as I move over or hover over this particular item. So if I'm over movie 1, it is going to make it bold there. It's a very simple directive. At least it will demonstrate the use case of how attribute directives are used. And I'm going to use a command called as ng directive, and I'm going to put it within directives slash, I'm going to put it within bold slash bold, and I'm going to hit enter. It is going to create that particular directive. It is going to make, all right, I'm really so sorry. ng generate is something that I definitely missed, and it should create the directive, and it should also update your ng module that is there. So now that we have created our directive, let me quickly go ahead and let it start the server. Meanwhile, we'll go and understand how to use it. If you notice, the directive is already created. I am going to go ahead do very small changes to it. I'm going to get something called as host listener. Host listener is something that will listen to the host or the parent events. So wherever you apply app bold as an attribute, that particular attribute, whenever there is some kind of action, the host listener will allow you to listen to that particular event. The second thing I'm going to get is something called as element ref, which is going to help you get the reference of the element this particular app bold is provided to. So I'm going to assign underscore el with element ref, and I'm going to access that particular element where this particular directive is assigned into el. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my host listener, which is also an annotation. And it takes one simple thing. It takes the name of the event that you want to capture. And it should also take the name of or the definition of the function that you need to do with that. I'm going to capture not just one mouse enter, but I'm also going to do a mouse out or mouse leave event. And I'm going to change the names accordingly. There we go. So I'm going to access this dot underscore el and the native element, and I'm going to apply style dot font weight. I'm going to do the same thing, but this time I'm going to apply it to null. So as soon as it moves out, we'll set it back. Very simple changes. If you notice, this is pure JavaScript. This is the only thing that you are doing to capture references. Before, in case of jQuery, you would basically do something like dollar, and in this dollar sign, if you want to capture something related to ID, you would do hash ID. If something related to class, you would do class name or something like that to get the reference of the element. In our case, in case of Angular, you would be doing element ref dot native element dot style dot font weight. That's how you would capture that particular section. Let's quickly look at whether it has compiled. Yes, it does seem to have been compiled, and it has not been applied. Why did it not apply? Because we did not apply it to the DOM. Let me quickly go back. Let me check first in the module. If you notice, bold directive is already there, which is fantastic, and I'm going to apply it to my list item. Let it get compiled. It did compile, and now whenever you hover, that particular section will actually change to bold. This is what is attribute directive, and that is how it is going to be applied. Attribute directive, this is a custom attribute directive because it's used as an attribute with some particular functionality attached. This is also an attribute directive. The only difference is this is an inbuilt attribute and this is a created attribute. That's the only difference. Great. So that was about directives. I would definitely want to introduce you to the Angular architecture. It's a very simple architecture. Remember, a component can have modules, it can have components, it can have services, it can have values, it can have functions. Modules will be declared in imports, components will be declared in declarations, services will be declared in providers or component providers wherever you want it, values also in providers because you would be using value as providers directly, and functions or maybe something attached to the service would also be defined specifically. You would be using @ injectable annotation to create services, But remember, you can have components only, services only, values only, functions only, modules as well. That is also possible. So and everything encompassed together or everything separate is also possible. Your component is associated to the template using a metadata which is provided by @component annotation. And you do property binding from JavaScript to template and event binding from template to JavaScript for changes. Directives are nothing but simple functionality with metadata that tells the directive how to be instantiated, how to work across, and what functionality to be provided. It does a very simple job, and that is manipulating the DOM. So that was about Angular architecture. I would definitely want to show you a very simple example. I'm going to get this closed and I'm going to go back and introduce you to a very simple demonstration where, let me just check if I have that already installed in one of my sections. All right, great. So I think I will definitely have to work across with this. Great. So let me quickly get this npm install done. So while it is installing, let me quickly explain this particular project. It's a very simple project which actually gets some data from the Firebase service. So this particular Firebase service is actually connecting to Firebase. It does get movie details from Firebase, search movies from the Firebase, get movies from the Firebase, etc. In the components, we have a very simple set of navbar component. So navbar component provides you with the functionality of creating navigation bar, and this is what it is. And you would have a movie search component which does searching. We have a movie details component which basically provides you with the list, and it repeats that particular movie list across in the section. And in case of the home, it is basically going to have the details of the home section, which is a route available. And the about section is an about section where details of Edureka has been provided. So it's a list of components that are already available. In my app.component, it's a very simple component that I have used where it has a router outlet. Router outlet is going to push all the components which are associated to a particular route into this particular section. So it's like a placeholder, and flash meshes are going to come in and sit here, app navbar before that. So router outlet is going to replace with each of the component whatever applies when you actually click on a particular navbar link. So if you click on X link, it will show the X component. That's what it basically does. So let me also show you the app module. So we have in the app module movie details, about, bold text, movies, navbar, home, and app component. And we are instantiating our app component out here. So this was a structure. These are basically auth keys for Firebase. Great. So we are almost done with installation. Let me quickly show you the navbar component. It basically does a login and a logout. That's all that it basically does. The movies is going to get the movies list. It's going to search the movies as well. And in movies details is going to do a get movie details in the instantiation, which is ng on it. It's basically a lifecycle hook where as soon as constructor is triggered, that particular section is going to be triggered. And in case of movies component, it's just going to go ahead call the login on click of login button. Great. So we are almost set up with this particular CLI project, and great. Now that it has been installed, let me quickly start at using ngserve. It is providing me an error saying that it's an older version. Great. So let's quickly go back, and this time it should load our movies list here. I have logged in with Google. It does a basic auth with Google, and this is the home. The movies list is going to fetch the movies list as soon as it is instantiated. And each of the section will provide you with the details of the movies. If you notice, the speed is kind of quite good, and it does do a fairly good job of getting the data from the network. And one of the best parts is after starting up this particular or loading up this particular application, it becomes insanely fast. And if things are in your cache, it just flies. It just works across pretty much well. A very simple application, but absolutely great to demonstrate the use case of how you can use ngCli along with working with Angular and getting your Angular up and running. Great, so that was about Angular. We went ahead and looked at what is Angular. We went ahead and looked at what is TypeScript. We did a quick start with an ngCli, and we went ahead, created a particular project. Along the whole course, we learned how to create a component, understand what is metadata, how to go ahead across, create templates, and how to work with templates. We also understood that the ngCli is going to generate spec files also, which can be used for unit testing. And we learned a few things along with that. The few things that we learned along with that is there are directives. We use structural directives as well as attribute directives. We created one custom attribute directive, as well as we went ahead created a service which we used it in our application. So that was a good nutshell about Angular. We do deliver a lot more details in one of our training sessions that is related to Angular. To go ahead, register for that, which I strongly recommend you to do, is go ahead, just click Angular. It would take you to that particular course material, and you should be able to work across with getting registered for this particular session. And in case you have questions, you can anytime go ahead, contact the support team, and you would be able to get the demos of this particular demonstration from the support team at support@edureka.co. In case you have questions related to sales and registering for this particular training, you can definitely do that. You can contact the sales team at sales@edureka.co. I hope to see you all in one of the session, and I definitely hope this particular session was very informative so that you can get started with Angular quite soon and in a much easier fashion. You all have a nice day, and I hope to see you in one of our Angular sessions.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply to them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to our Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!